November 10, 1942. A farmer in rural Anderson County, Tennessee, opens a letter from the United States War Department. The message is brief and absolute. The War Department intends to take possession of your farm by December 1, 1942. 3 weeks. That's all the time he has to leave land his family has owned for generations. He has one simple question: what are you building here? The government representative's answer is both vague and chilling. A military installation, that's all we can say. But if we succeed, this will help end the war. Within 18 months, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers would transform 59,000 acres of Appalachian farmland into the 5th largest city in Tennessee. A city with 75,000 residents, miles of roads, dozens of factories, hundreds of dormitories, schools, churches, and bus systems. A city that consumed 1/7 of all electricity produced in the United States. A city that didn't exist on any map. A city where workers didn't know what they were building. A city with a secret so explosive that even the people living there couldn't know the truth. This is the story of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the engineering challenge that required building an entire secret metropolis in record time while maintaining absolute security. This is the story of how military engineers solved the most complex construction and secrecy challenge in American history. By mid-1942, the Manhattan Project faced a crisis that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with real estate. Scientists had cracked the theoretical framework for atomic fission. They understood the process. But transforming laboratory experiments into industrial-scale production required something unprecedented. Massive facilities that consumed enormous amounts of electricity, required thousands of workers, yet needed to remain completely secret from enemy intelligence. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers received specifications that seemed contradictory. The site needed to be remote enough to avoid German or Japanese reconnaissance, yet close enough to major power infrastructure. It required enough space for multiple massive industrial facilities separated by safety distances, yet couldn't be so large that land acquisition would attract attention. The location needed access to abundant water for cooling, stable geology for heavy structures, and moderate climate for year-round construction. Colonel James C. Marshall, heading the Manhattan Engineer District's initial operations, identified 59,000 acres in East Tennessee near a small town called Clinton. The location was perfect for one reason above all others: the nearby Norris Dam, completed just 7 years earlier as part of the Tennessee Valley Authority project, could provide virtually unlimited electrical power. But Marshall faced an engineering timeline that defied logic. Construction had to begin immediately. Workers needed housing before facilities could be built. The entire city infrastructure, water, sewage, electricity, roads, hospitals, fire departments, had to be designed and constructed simultaneously with the secret facilities, and nobody except the top engineers could know what they were actually building. The challenge wasn't just constructing buildings, it was constructing an entire functioning city in 18 months while maintaining operational security that would normally take years to establish. General Leslie Groves, who took command of the entire Manhattan Project on September 17, 1942, gave Marshall a deadline that seemed impossible: major facilities operational by 1944. That meant a complete city, fully functioning, in less than 2 years. On Saturday, September 19, 1942, just 2 days after assuming command, Groves approved the acquisition of 59,000 acres along the Clinch River, 20 miles west of Knoxville. The clock started ticking immediately. Before a single nail could be hammered, the government faced its first massive challenge: acquiring 59,000 acres of privately owned land without revealing why they needed it. Traditional land acquisition through eminent domain typically takes years of negotiations, surveys, and legal proceedings. The Manhattan Project had months at best. Making this more complex, the Appalachian families who owned this land had deep roots. Some properties had been family-owned since the 1790s. These weren't absentee landlords, these were homes, farms, and communities. The Army Corps of Engineers developed a controversial but efficient solution. On September 29, 1942, they invoked the War Powers Act, which gave the government authority to seize private property for military necessity with minimal legal review. But they couldn't reveal the true purpose without compromising security. Approximately 3,000 families received notices in late 1942 that their land was needed for a military installation. No further details, no appeals process. Compensation was determined by government appraisers, and residents had between 30 to 90 days to relocate. The human cost was significant. Entire communities disappeared. Scarborough, a predominantly African-American farming community, was displaced. Elza, named after a railroad construction engineer, vanished. Wheat, Robertsville, and New Hope, small settlements that had existed for generations, were erased from the map. Churches that had stood for over a century were demolished. Cemeteries had to be relocated, a particularly painful process that required exhuming and moving hundreds of graves to new locations. But what they didn't know was that behind the scenes, engineers were already working against an impossible clock. Survey teams moved in immediately after acquisition, sometimes before families had completely vacated. They worked day and night, mapping terrain, identifying water sources, testing soil composition, and marking locations for facilities that existed only in classified blueprints locked in Washington safes. The acquisition process, normally a multi-year endeavor, was completed in just under 4 months. By March 1943, the government controlled 56,000 acres, slightly less than originally planned, but sufficient for the project. The land was cleared. The real construction challenge was about to begin. March 1943. Construction crews arrived to find nothing but Appalachian wilderness. No roads, no utilities, no infrastructure whatsoever. Their job? Build a city for 75,000 people in 12 months. The engineering team, led by Stone and Webster for the industrial facilities and Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill for the town planning, faced a problem no civilian project had ever encountered. They had to construct 3 massive industrial facilities simultaneously while building the entire city infrastructure to support them. And they had to do it in terrain that was frankly terrible for construction. The site consisted of 3 ridges separated by valleys. The soil was red Tennessee clay, notorious for becoming impassable mud during rain. The area received over 50 inches of rain annually. The terrain was heavily wooded with dense undergrowth, and it was currently accessible by exactly 1 narrow country road. The chief engineer, Colonel Kenneth Nichols, made a radical decision. Instead of trying to build permanent infrastructure immediately, they would build temporary roads, temporary housing, and temporary utilities first, then upgrade everything while construction continued. This meant construction happened in phases, all simultaneously. Phase 1, access infrastructure. Within 30 days, crews carved 55 miles of gravel roads through the wilderness. These weren't proper roads. They were graded dirt paths reinforced with gravel. But they were passable by construction vehicles, and that's what mattered. Simultaneously, they constructed a new railway spur connecting the site to the Southern Railway's main line, enabling delivery of heavy equipment and materials.
Phase 2, worker housing. Here's where the engineering got creative. Traditional home construction would take years. The solution was prefabricated housing on an unprecedented scale. Crews constructed cemesto houses, small prefabricated structures made from cement-coated asbestos board panels. Each house could be assembled in 3 days. By June 1943, construction crews were averaging 17 houses completed per day. For single workers, they built massive dormitories using an assembly line process. Foundations were poured in the morning, wall frames erected by afternoon, roofs installed the following day, interior work completed within a week. These weren't quality homes, they were functional shelters, but they worked. The real breakthrough came when engineers realized they couldn't build fast enough to meet demand. The solution was trailers and hutments, essentially wooden shacks with minimal insulation. By summer 1943, the site had become a bizarre mix of prefab houses, dormitories, trailers, and temporary shacks housing a rapidly growing population. Phase 3, utilities infrastructure. This is where the engineering complexity escalated dramatically. The water system alone required incredible coordination. Engineers constructed a water treatment plant capable of processing 13 million gallons daily, along with 90 miles of water distribution pipes, all while the city was actively being built and occupied. Crews dug trenches, laid pipes, and backfilled them while workers lived in houses on the same streets. The electrical system was even more complex. Oak Ridge would consume approximately 1/7 of all electricity produced in the United States between 1943 and 1945, an almost incomprehensible amount of power for a single location. The Tennessee Valley Authority constructed new transmission lines capable of carrying this massive power load. Within the site, engineers installed 26 substations and over 55 miles of primary electrical distribution lines. The sewage system presented unique problems. Traditional sewage treatment requires gravity flow to treatment plants, but Oak Ridge's ridge and valley terrain made this difficult. Engineers designed a system with multiple lift stations that pumped sewage uphill to treatment facilities on higher ground. They installed 35 miles of sewer lines, serving a population that was growing by thousands every month. But here's what made this truly extraordinary. All of this construction happened simultaneously. While roads were being paved, houses were being erected on those roads. While utility trenches were being dug, workers were already living in the houses those utilities would serve. Construction never stopped. Workers on one shift would complete a foundation. The next shift would frame the building. 24-hour construction, 7 days a week, for 18 months straight. By December 1943, Oak Ridge had 45,000 residents. By spring 1944, that number had climbed to 75,000. The city had become Tennessee's 5th largest, yet still appeared on no maps. Post office workers sorted mail for a city that officially didn't exist.
Building the city was complex. Keeping it secret was nearly impossible. General Groves understood that 75,000 people couldn't simply disappear without questions being asked. The solution wasn't to hide the city's existence. That was impossible. The solution was to hide what the city was doing. The security engineering challenge had multiple layers, each requiring different technical solutions. Physical security barriers. The entire site was surrounded by a fence line covering 59,000 acres. Not a simple fence, a 7-foot-tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, supported by guard towers positioned every mile. The perimeter was patrolled 24 hours daily by armed military police. 7 gates controlled all access, each with multiple checkpoints.
But the real security innovation was internal zoning. Oak Ridge was divided into restricted areas with different security clearances. The residential areas were relatively open. The industrial zones were strictly controlled. And within the industrial zones, individual facilities had additional security perimeters. Workers received color-coded badges indicating their clearance level. White badges allowed access to residential areas only. Blue badges permitted entry to certain work areas. Red badges granted access to restricted facilities. The system was simple but effective. Guards could instantly identify whether someone belonged in a specific area. Compartmentalization of knowledge. Here's where the engineering became psychological. The facilities were designed so workers could perform their jobs without understanding the larger purpose. Take the Y-12 electromagnetic separation facility. This massive building employed 22,000 workers operating calutrons, large electromagnetic devices for uranium enrichment. Workers were trained to monitor specific dials and adjust controls to keep readings within specified ranges. They didn't know they were enriching uranium. They didn't know what uranium was. They knew only their specific task: keep the needle in the green zone. The K-25 gaseous diffusion plant employed similar compartmentalization. Workers assembled massive diffusion chambers without knowing what would flow through them. Maintenance crews repaired equipment without understanding its purpose. Chemical operators managed processes without knowing the end product. This compartmentalization was engineered into the physical design. Facilities were divided into separate buildings with minimal communication between them. Workers entered through different gates, worked in isolated sections, and left without encountering workers from other areas. Communication control. Perhaps the most innovative security engineering involved controlling information flow within a city of 75,000 people. The telephone system was monitored. Not every call, that would be impossible, but the military police maintained the capability to monitor any call without warning. More importantly, workers knew calls could be monitored, which discouraged careless conversation. Mail was censored. Every piece of mail leaving Oak Ridge passed through a censorship office, where military personnel read every letter, removing any references to the work being done. Workers were instructed to use Oak Ridge, Tennessee as their mailing address, which revealed nothing about the site's purpose. The Oak Ridge Journal, first published in 1944, covered local events, community news, and entertainment, but never mentioned what the city actually produced. Every article was reviewed before publication. However, the biggest challenge was still ahead: preventing 75,000 people from talking to each other. By mid-1944, Oak Ridge faced a crisis that threatened the entire mission. It wasn't a construction problem or a security breach. It was boredom, frustration, and isolation. Workers lived in a city that officially didn't exist. They couldn't tell their families what they did. They worked long shifts on mysterious equipment. They lived in cramped housing with shared facilities. The nearest real town, Clinton, was small and couldn't accommodate 75,000 visitors. Workers had nowhere to go, nothing to do, and no idea why they were there. Morale plummeted. Turnover rates soared. By spring 1944, Oak Ridge was losing workers faster than it could hire replacements. Some workers simply walked off the job and left. Others began asking dangerous questions. General Groves recognized this as an engineering problem requiring an engineering solution. If workers needed reasons to stay, the Army would engineer those reasons. The solution was to build not just a city, but a community. The Army constructed recreational facilities at a pace matching the industrial construction. Within months, Oak Ridge had movie theaters, bowling alleys, swimming pools, tennis courts, and baseball fields. They built a library with 9,000 books. They established a symphony orchestra, theater groups, and social clubs. They constructed schools for workers' children. By 1945, Oak Ridge had schools serving 10,000 children. They built churches representing multiple denominations. They established a hospital with 300 beds and a full medical staff. They even created a social structure. The Army sponsored dances every weekend. They organized sports leagues. They created a community council that gave residents limited input into non-security-related decisions. Most ingeniously, they created a narrative that workers could believe in without knowing the truth. Workers were told they were part of a crucial war effort. They were told that their work, whatever it was, would help end the war faster. They were told that maintaining security was patriotic. This narrative gave meaning to the secrecy and hardship. It worked. By fall 1944, turnover rates had stabilized. Workers stayed even though they didn't know what they were building. They stayed because Oak Ridge had become a community, not just a construction site. But the real breakthrough came when engineers realized something profound. The security didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be good enough, long enough.
November 1943. Just 13 months after breaking ground, the first production facility at Oak Ridge began operations. The Y-12 electromagnetic separation plant began enriching uranium while construction crews were still completing sections of the building. This represented an engineering achievement that had never been attempted before and has never been replicated since. Oak Ridge went from wilderness to operational industrial city in just over a year. The three main production facilities demonstrated different engineering solutions to the same challenge, uranium enrichment. Y-12 electromagnetic separation. This facility used massive electromagnetic calatrons arranged in oval racetracks. Uranium hexafluoride gas was ionized and passed through powerful magnetic fields that separated lighter U-235 isotopes from heavier U-238. The facility required so much copper for electromagnetic coils that the government borrowed 14,700 tons of silver from the U.S. Treasury as a substitute conductor. K-25 gaseous diffusion plant. When completed in 1945, this became the largest building in the world under one roof, covering 44 acres. Uranium hexafluoride gas was pumped through thousands of porous barriers, with lighter U-235 molecules passing through slightly faster than heavier U-238. This process required thousands of repetitions through cascade stages to achieve sufficient enrichment. S-50 liquid thermal diffusion plant. This facility used temperature differences to separate isotopes. Uranium hexafluoride was pumped through tall vertical columns with hot walls and cold centers, causing lighter isotopes to concentrate near the hot surfaces. Each facility operated 24 hours daily, consuming enormous amounts of electricity, water, and materials. The coordination required was staggering. Thousands of workers on multiple shifts, maintaining equipment that couldn't fail, producing a product they didn't understand. By early 1945, Oak Ridge was producing enriched uranium at rates sufficient for the Manhattan Project's needs. The city that didn't exist was succeeding at a mission its residents didn't know. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay dropped Little Boy on Hiroshima. The bomb's core contained enriched uranium from Oak Ridge. 3 days later, a plutonium bomb struck Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. Only then did Oak Ridge workers learn what they had built. August 6, 1945. Workers arriving for their shifts at Oak Ridge noticed something unusual. Supervisors were gathered in small groups, speaking quietly. Production continued,
but tension filled the air. Then the loudspeakers crackled to life. An announcement explained for the first time what Oak Ridge had actually been building. Workers who had monitored mysterious dials had been enriching uranium. Workers who had assembled strange equipment had been building components for an atomic weapon. Workers who had maintained security protocols had been protecting the most important military secret in American history. The reaction was complex. Some felt pride. They had contributed to ending the war. Others felt shock. They had been building a weapon of unprecedented destructive power. Many felt simple relief. The secrecy finally made sense. General Groves released a statement acknowledging Oak Ridge's existence and purpose. Overnight, the city that didn't exist appeared on maps across the country. The secret address was replaced with actual street addresses. The fence line remained, but the intense security began to ease. But here's what made Oak Ridge truly remarkable. The city didn't disappear after the war ended. Unlike many wartime facilities that were abandoned or demolished, Oak Ridge continued operating. The Atomic Energy Commission took over management from the Army. The production facilities transitioned from weapons work to peaceful nuclear research. The city that had been engineered as a temporary solution became permanent. Today, Oak Ridge is a real city with approximately 30,000 residents. The original production facilities are decommissioned, but the site remains a major nuclear research center. Oak Ridge National Laboratory continues cutting-edge research in nuclear science, material science, and supercomputing. The Y-12 National Security Complex still operates on the original site, maintaining the nation's nuclear weapons stockpile. The K-25 building was demolished in 2013 due to contamination, but a portion was preserved as a memorial and interpretive center. The engineering lessons from Oak Ridge influenced post-war development. The prefabrication techniques used to build housing quickly influenced suburban development in the 1950s. The compartmentalized security protocols became standard for classified government projects. The model of government-sponsored industrial research led to the creation of numerous national laboratories.
The engineering challenge that Oak Ridge represented, building massive infrastructure under impossible deadlines while maintaining operational security, remains relevant today. Modern megaprojects face similar challenges. The construction of data centers for tech companies requires rapid building timelines while maintaining security around proprietary technology. Space exploration facilities must balance public interest with classified capabilities. Pandemic response facilities, as we saw recently, require rapid construction of large-scale infrastructure under crisis conditions. But Oak Ridge teaches a more fundamental lesson about engineering. Impossible deadlines become possible when you're willing to abandon conventional approaches. The engineers who built Oak Ridge didn't try to build a permanent city with perfect infrastructure. They built a functional city with adequate infrastructure, knowing they could improve it later. They accepted that roads would be muddy, housing would be cramped, and utilities would be barely sufficient. They prioritized speed over perfection. This pragmatic engineering philosophy solved a problem that conventional approaches would have failed to address. Could Oak Ridge have been built properly with perfect planning and comfortable timelines? Absolutely. But it would have taken 5 years and the war would have been over. The secret city succeeded because engineers recognized that good enough delivered on time beats perfection delivered too late. Oak Ridge stands as proof that the biggest engineering challenges aren't always technical. Sometimes they're logistical, organizational, and human. Sometimes the hardest part isn't designing the solution, it's building it fast enough to matter. The city that didn't exist changed history.
not because of sophisticated technology or brilliant innovations, but because engineers were willing to build a massive, complex, imperfect solution in record time. That's the real secret of the secret city. If you found this story fascinating, you'll want to explore more engineering challenges that shaped history. In the next video, we'll examine how military engineers built functional artificial harbors on the beaches of Normandy in just days, a construction challenge that made D-Day possible. Don't miss it. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to see how engineers solved the impossible logistics problem that won World War II.